Grant Amato was a 29-year-old nurse and casual content creator living with his family in Chulioda, Florida. He'd occasionally post videos online with plans to build connections and eventually find his place in the digital world. Sylvia Venceslavova was a Bulgarian webcam model who streamed on adult websites for paying customers. She had thousands of viewers, and one of them was willing to destroy everything for her attention. But on January 24th, 2019, Grant had just been cut off from his online obsession. The three people in his family were about to pay the ultimate price. Grant discovered Sylvia's stream in late 2018 and immediately became fixated. He'd spend hours watching her, sending messages, and paying for private sessions. The costs added up quickly, but Grant didn't care. He started stealing from his family to fund his habit. First, he took money from his father's bank accounts. Then he stole his brother Cody's credit card information and racked up thousands in charges. When his family discovered the theft in December 2018, they were horrified to learn that he'd spent over $200,000 on a woman he'd never met in person. His nursing license had already been suspended for stealing medication from patients, and now this. The family staged an intervention. Grant's father, Chad, and mother, Margaret, told him he needed to attend therapy and cut off all contact with Sylvia. They'd help him get back on his feet, but only if he stopped immediately. Grant agreed, promised to change, and even started attending counseling sessions. But he didn't stop. Grant continued secretly contacting Sylvia, stealing more money to send her. He'd tell his family he was at therapy when he was actually at internet cafes, chatting with her and sending payments. His brother Cody discovered the continued contact in mid-January 2019 and told their parents. The family gave Grant an ultimatum. He had to move out, get help, and prove he was serious about recovery, or they'd cut him off completely. For some odd reason, the idea of losing access to someone who saw him as nothing more than a paying customer was enough to make Grant snap. On January 24th, 2019, Grant returned to the family home in Chulioda while everyone was there. He brought with him an IWI Jericho 941 pistol he'd taken from his father's collection. Around 4 a.m., he shot his father Chad in the head while he sat at his desk. Then he went to his mother Margaret's bedroom and shot her as she slept. Finally, he killed his brother Cody in the kitchen. After shooting all three, Grant tried to stage the scene to look like a murder-suicide, making it appear that Cody had killed their parents before taking his own life. He wiped down surfaces, moved the weapon, and repositioned bodies. Then he drove to a local hotel and checked in, acting as though nothing had happened. Police discovered the bodies the next day after family members couldn't reach anyone. Investigators immediately noticed inconsistencies in the stage scene. Forensic evidence showed the weapon placement was wrong, and there was no gunshot residue on Cody's hands. Security footage showed Grant's car leaving the property around the same time of the murders. Grant was arrested at the hotel. During questioning, he denied involvement, but his phone records told a different story. Even after killing his family, he'd sent Sylvia more messages and payments from the hotel. Police found he'd accessed his father's bank accounts hours after the murders to transfer funds. At trial in July 2019, prosecutors presented evidence of Grant's obsession, the thefts, and the staged crime scene. His defense argued that he was mentally ill, but the jury didn't buy it. Grant was convicted of 3 counts of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. In a bizarre twist, Grant made headlines again in 2025 when prison officials discovered he'd smuggled the phone into his cell and was using it to continue contacting people online. Madness. Stephen McCullough was a 32-year-old gamer from Lurgan, Northern Ireland, who ran a YouTube channel called Vote Saxon 07. He would stream gameplay sessions for hours, building a small but dedicated following. His girlfriend, Natalie McNally, was 32 years old and 15 weeks pregnant with her child. They'd been together for a while, shared a home, and seemed stable to outsiders. But on December 18th, 2022, Natalie would discover that her boyfriend had been planning something far darker than any game he'd ever played. In weeks before, Stephen had been Googling disturbing search terms, painful death methods, how to avoid forensic detection, timeframes for rigor mortis. He knew exactly what he was doing, and he'd spend time crafting the perfect alibi. On December 18th, Stephen pre-recorded a 6-hour gaming stream, complete with commentary, gameplay footage, and even periodic interactions that would make it seem like he was live. He set it to upload, and he was playing as if he were streaming in real time. Then he texted friends during the upload, saying things like "stream the night away" to make it look authentic. While his fake stream played online, Stephen went to Natalie's home. He attacked her with a knife, stabbing her multiple times and applying pressure to her neck until she stopped breathing. Then he left, returned to his own location, and continued acting as though he'd been gaming the entire time. Natalie's body was discovered the next day by her mother. Police immediately began investigating, and Stephen's stream alibi seemed solid at first. He had timestamps, viewer interactions, and what appeared to be a continuous 6-hour broadcast during the exact time of the murder. For some odd reason, he thought a pre-recorded video would fool forensic investigators who specialize in digital evidence. But CCTV CCTV footage told a different story. Security cameras near Natalie's home captured someone matching Stephen's description entering and leaving during the time frame of the murder. Further analysis of his stream revealed inconsistencies. The video quality, file, metadata, and upload patterns didn't match a live broadcast. Investigators determined it had been recorded hours earlier. Stephen was arrested and charged with murder. He denied involvement, pointing to his stream as proof of innocence, but the evidence was overwhelming. The search history, the CCTV footage, forensic analysis of Natalie's injuries, and the fake stream all painted a clear picture. As of 2024, Stephen McCullough had been denied bail and is awaiting trial for the murder of Natalie McNally and their unborn child. Like cases before him, there was another young man who used the internet to fuel his descent into violence. Jake Davison was a 22-year-old from Plymouth, England, who ran a YouTube channel under the name Professor Waffle. He'd post long rants about his loneliness, his hatred for women, and his belief that society had rejected him for being unattractive and unsuccessful. Davison had been diagnosed with autism and ADHD as a child. He struggled socially, had few friends, and lived with his brother Maxine. Their relationship was turbulent. They'd argue frequently, and Jake blamed her for many of his problems. He'd also become obsessed with bodybuilding, abusing anabolic steroids, and consuming excessive amounts of energy drinks, which likely contributed to his deteriorating mental state. Online, Jake fell into incel communities. He idolized Elliot Rodger, watched videos about the Isla Vista killings, and posted his own content expressing similar beliefs. In one video, he called himself a Terminator and talked about how he'd been defeated by life. He applied for a shotgun license in 2017, and despite concerns raised by some who knew him, it was granted. In 2020, his license was temporarily revoked after he assaulted someone, but it was reinstated in July 2021. Just weeks later, on August 12, 2021, Jake's frustrations boiled over. At around 6:05 p.m., he shot his mother Maxine in their home. Then he walked out into the streets of Plymouth with his pump-action shotgun and began shooting people at random. He killed Stephen Washington, a 59-year-old man walking his dogs. Then he shot and killed 3-year-old Sophie Martin and her father Lee Martin. He also killed Kate Shepard, a 66-year-old woman he encountered in a nearby park. Jake walked through the neighborhood like he was on patrol, calm and methodical. Witnesses reported he showed no emotion as he fired. The entire attack lasted about 18 minutes. Police arrived and pursued him, but before they could apprehend him, Jake turned the weapon on himself. He took his own life at the scene. Jake had been referred to a mental health intervention program called Prevent, which is designed to identify individuals at risk of radicalization, but he was deemed not to meet the criteria. His firearms license had been returned despite documented violent behavior. His online content was filled with red flags, but no system connected the dots in time. The Plymouth shooting became the first mass shooting in the UK since 2010 and sparked immediate debate about firearms licensing, social media monitoring, and mental health intervention. Reforms were proposed requiring police to check applicants' social media accounts before granting gun licenses, changes that might have prevented Jake from ever obtaining a weapon. I know these last two stories were about YouTubers who destroyed lives for completely different reasons, but nonetheless, I still thought they were important to include because they all share something in common. Trey Sessler was a 22-year-old aspiring filmmaker from Waller County, Texas, who ran 2 YouTube channels with plans to build an audience and eventually become known for his creative content. He uploaded comedy skits to Lenscap Productions and anime reviews to a channel called Mr. Anime, which had accumulated over 1 million views. His content seemed harmless, enthusiastic even, just another young creator trying to make it online. But Trey had another obsession that his subscribers never saw. He spent hours researching mass murderers and school shooters. In college, he'd written a research paper where he actually graded serial killers like Ted Bundy and Jeffrey Dahmer on their effectiveness and notoriety. He studied the Columbine shooting extensively, watched documentaries about Virginia Tech, and became fixated on the idea of outdoing them all. He wanted infamy, and he'd been planning exactly how to get it. In the months before March 2012, Trey began preparing. He tortured and killed small animals in his backyard. He'd go out late at night to practice shooting in remote areas, getting comfortable with his growing weapons collection. He bought a .22 rifle, a Glock pistol, an AR-15, and even a high-point carbine. In January 2012, he posted a cryptic video that seemed to hint at his plans, though no one picked up on it at the time. Let's pause here for a second. You see, Trey had decided that before he could carry out a school shooting, he needed to eliminate what he called immediate obstacles, and that means his family. He lived at home with his parents, Rhonda and Lawton Sessler, and his younger brother Mark. For some odd reason, he convinced himself that murdering his entire family was necessary practice before moving on to his real target. On March 20th, 2012, around 1 p.m., Trey put his plan into motion. He lured his mother Rhonda into the garage under the pretense of showing her something. When she turned away, he shot her with his .22 rifle. His brother Mark, hearing the gunshot, ran toward the garage to see what happened. Trey shot him too, but Mark survived the initial wound. As his brother lay bleeding and wounded on the floor, Trey executed him with a point-blank shot to ensure he was gone. Then he waited for his father Lawton to come home from work. When his father walked through the door, Trey shot him as well. After killing all 3 family members, Trey did something strange. He wrote messages on the walls of the house. "God forgive me. I'm sorry." The notes seemed apologetic, almost remorseful, but investigators would later determine they were likely an attempt to make himself seem less calculating. He also killed the family pets and left the home looking like a war zone. But then something unexpected happened. Trey didn't follow through with his school shooting plan. He later told investigators that after killing his family, the idea of attacking a school became too real. The fantasy he'd built up in his mind collided with the actual reality of taking lives, and he couldn't go through with the larger massacre he'd planned. Police arrived at the Sessler home after neighbors reported not seeing the family for days and noticed a terrible smell. They found the bodies and the destruction inside. Trey was arrested shortly after. During the investigation, police discovered his weapons cache, his research into mass shooters, and evidence of his original plan to attack a local school. At trial, Trey pleaded guilty to capital murder. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole in 2012. His YouTube channels were taken down, and his case became a warning about how online content can mask dangerous radicalization happening behind the scenes. If you think that case showed how YouTube fame and violence can mix in disturbing ways, the next story takes it even further into delusion. Randy Steer was a 24-year-old animator from Tunkhannock, Pennsylvania, who ran a YouTube channel called Pioneers Productions. He started by posting comedy sketches, but over time, his content evolved into animated series, particularly one called Ember's Ghost Squad. The series was based on characters from the Nickelodeon show Danny Phantom, and Randy had become completely obsessed with one character in particular, Ember McLean. Randy struggled with gender dysphoria and severe loneliness. He felt disconnected from reality and began believing that when he died, he'd be transported to an alternate universe where he'd become a female member of his cartoon Ghost Squad. He posted videos expressing these beliefs, talking about his hatred for humanity and his admiration for the Columbine shooters. In one video, he called himself a Terminator and said he'd been defeated by life. He worked the overnight shift at a Wise Market's grocery store in Tunkhannock. His coworkers described him as quiet and strange, but not openly threatening. What they didn't know was that Randy had been planning to make his exit from this world in the most violent way possible. On June 8th, 2017, Randy arrived for his overnight shift carrying 2 Mossberg 500 shotguns. Just before 1 a.m., he blocked the store's exits with heavy carts and equipment, trapping his coworkers inside. Then, he started shooting. He fired 59 shots in just 4 minutes. 3 of his coworkers were struck and passed away. Randy had apparently decided which coworkers to spare based on a coin flip he'd done earlier, a decision he'd documented in his online journals. One employee survived by hiding and was spared based on Randy's arbitrary system. At 1:01 a.m., Randy turned one of the shotguns on himself. He took his own life in the store, believing he'd wake up as a cartoon character in an alternate dimension. He'd even titled one of his final videos, The Westboro High Massacre, a reference to his original plan to attack a school before settling on his workplace instead. For some odd reason, he genuinely thought that murdering his coworkers would transport him to a cartoon universe where he'd finally be happy. The shooting shocked the small Pennsylvania community. Vigils were held for the victims, and investigators combed through Randy's extensive online presence, finding hundreds of hours of content documenting his mental decline. His case highlighted the dangers of untreated mental health issues, gender dysphoria-related distress, and online radicalization through violent content. But Randy wasn't the only YouTuber whose pursuit of online fame or delusion led to tragedy. Mona Lisa Perez was a 19-year-old from Minnesota who ran a prank channel with her boyfriend, Pedro Ruiz. In June 2017, Pedro convinced Mona Lisa to shoot him while he held an encyclopedia in front of his chest, believing the book would stop the bullet. It didn't. Mona Lisa fired a 50 AE Desert Eagle. The bullet went straight through the book, and Pedro was gone. She was charged with manslaughter and served 6 months in jail. The incident became a stark warning about dangerous YouTube stunts and the pressure to create viral content. Alyssa Dayvault was a makeup and lifestyle YouTuber from Georgia. Between 2017 and 2018, she secretly gave birth to 2 babies alone in her home, and then disposed of their bodies in the trash. She'd hidden both pregnancies entirely. Investigators determined both infants passed away from oxygen deprivation shortly after birth. Alyssa was arrested, convicted, and sentenced to 40 years in prison for infanticide and child cruelty.